He called her his personal slave. She was working 4 jobs to pay off his debts, while he spent her money on another woman. But tonight, Naomi's done being quiet. She just found a secret phone he thought she'd never see, and what's inside will destroy him. By 5, she was dressed in pale blue scrubs, her dark hair tied back in a tired bun. The hospital halls smelled of disinfectant and coffee, of exhaustion and hope. She worked in billing, behind a computer screen most of the time, her fingers moving faster than her thoughts. Insurance codes, claim rejections, calls from families who couldn't afford another bill. It was endless. Sometimes, when the fluorescent lights made her head throb, she would glance at her phone and see Derek's name. No message, no call, just the silence of someone who didn't know what it meant to work themselves to the bone. At 2 o'clock, she clocked out, her shoulders tight with fatigue. There was no time to rest. She would grab a protein bar from the vending machine and eat it in her car as she drove across town to her second job. The call center. The office smelled like microwave noodles and burnt coffee. Naomi slipped on her headset and logged into the system. "Thank you for calling Blue Wave Communications. My name is Naomi. How can I help you today?" She repeated over and over, her voice polite but hollow. Most calls ended with someone yelling about a bill, about a service outage, about something entirely out of her control. By 7, her throat was dry, her temples pulsed, and her voice cracked from fake cheerfulness. She'd earned $56 for those 4 hours. Not enough to make a difference, but every penny mattered when you were patching up a life that someone else had broken. When the clock hit 7:30, she was already pulling her apron over her uniform. The restaurant was loud, crowded, and unforgiving. She smiled on autopilot. "Hi, I'm Naomi. I'll be taking care of you tonight." The phrase had become her second name. Customers complained about undercooked steaks or the lack of extra ranch. They snapped fingers, waved hands, demanded things with the entitlement of people who'd never had to clean someone else's mess. Naomi's feet burned. Her knees ached, but she smiled anyway. Tips meant groceries. Tips meant gas. Tips meant Derek's next emergency wouldn't destroy them completely. When the dinner rush ended around 10, she could finally breathe. But the night wasn't over. There was still the last job, the one she told no one about. By 10:30, she was in another building downtown, vacuum humming beneath her hands, the echo of her footsteps her only company. The offices she cleaned were quiet and pristine, the kind of spaces where people made 6 figures and left behind untouched bottled water on their desks. She emptied trash cans, wiped down glass tables, straightened chairs. Her reflection in the windows looked ghost-like, eyes hollow, shoulders hunched, uniforms smudged with fatigue. Sometimes she wondered if Derek ever thought about her at this hour. Probably not. He would be home watching TV or playing his games, waiting for her to come back so he could ask if she'd picked up more shifts. Naomi didn't blame him, at least not out loud. He said he was looking for work. He said he was trying to fix things. And every time he said it, she wanted to believe him, because belief was cheaper than admitting she'd made a mistake. When she finally turned off the last light, the clock read 11:15. Her legs trembled as she walked her car. The drive home blurred, traffic lights, empty roads, the hum of the engine. Her fingers gripped the steering wheel, but her thoughts drifted somewhere between dreams and dread. She thought about their house, the mortgage she paid, the groceries she bought, the debt she was still paying off from Derek's bad bets. She thought about the woman she used to be, the one who had time for brunches, books, and laughter. That woman felt like someone else now, someone she'd once known before exhaustion became her only constant. By the time she parked in the driveway, her body felt like lead. Her hands shook as she turned off the ignition. The porch light glowed softly, but instead of warmth, it felt like judgment. The house looked peaceful from the outside, but inside was a battlefield disguised as a marriage. Naomi lingered in the car for a moment, forehead resting on the steering wheel. She could hear the faint hum of the television through the walls. Derek was still awake. He always was. She forced herself out of the car, every step heavier than the last. Inside, the air smelled like whiskey and pizza, signs that Derek had eaten well. Her own stomach twisted with hunger, but she ignored it. A shower, maybe a sandwich, 4 hours of sleep. Then she'd start again. That was the cycle. Wake, work, repeat. Still, when she passed by the framed wedding photo in the hallway, she paused. Derek's smile was wide in that picture. Her own eyes sparkled with hope. She believed they were partners back then, a team facing the world together. Just until I get back on my feet, he had said years ago. You're my rock, Naomi. You're the only one I can count on. And she had believed him. But now, standing there in the silence, she realized how heavy that word had become. Rock. It didn't mean strength anymore. It meant weight. It meant being stuck, unmoving, carrying everything alone. Her body ached, but her heart hurt more. She wanted to believe that the long days and sleepless nights meant something, that the struggle would eventually lead somewhere better. But lately, even her faith was starting to crumble. When she collapsed into bed, her muscles refused to relax. The mattress felt too soft, her pillow too thin. The ticking clock on the nightstand was merciless. 3 hours until she had to do it all again. She stared at the ceiling and whispered to the dark. We're a team, right? But the silence that answered her was heavier than any shift she'd ever worked. Naomi closed her eyes, telling herself that tomorrow would be better. It had to be, because if it wasn't, if this exhaustion was all there was, then love wasn't saving her anymore. It was breaking her. And deep down, though she wouldn't admit it yet, Naomi was beginning to realize that love should never feel like labor. Welcome back, my beautiful family and friends, to my YouTube channel. I have missed you all. Click subscribe and let me know in the comments where you're watching from, because tomorrow I will be giving you another story, just as interesting as this one, and you don't want to miss it. Now, back to the story. The night air was heavy, thick with the scent of rain that hadn't yet fallen. Naomi's hands trembled as she turned the key in the front door, the same key that had always felt like entry to safety, to home. Tonight, though, it felt cold, metallic, unfamiliar. Her body ached from another 16-hour stretch, the kind of exhaustion that made her bones hum. All she wanted was silence, a shower, maybe 2 slices of toast before collapsing into the few hours of sleep she could steal before morning. But as she stepped into the narrow hallway, she froze. Laughter, Derek's laughter, spilled from the bedroom. Loud, careless, alive in a way she hadn't heard from him in years. It rolled through the house like an echo from the past. For a heartbeat, she smiled. Maybe he'd found a job. Maybe, finally, something had gone right. Then she heard the words. Man, I'm telling you, Derek said, his voice warm with arrogance. I've got it made. Another voice answered, deep, amused. Got it made? You're still broke, aren't you? Derek laughed again, a sound that cut sharper than any knife. Broke? Nah, not really. My wife works 4 jobs. 4. I don't have to lift a damn finger. She's like my personal slave. The words hit Naomi like a physical blow. Her hand slipped from the doorknob, her purse falling silently to the floor. Her heart stumbled, then stopped altogether. She pressed her back against the wall, the plaster cool against her sweat-damp skin. Your personal what? One of the men asked, half laughing, half incredulous. Slave, Derek repeated proudly. She thinks she's helping me get out of debt. Thinks we're a team. But honestly, she just makes it easy for me to breathe. The men erupted in laughter. Someone whistled. Damn, man, that's cold. Cold, Derek said, chuckling between sips. She could hear the clink of ice against glass. Nah, that's smart. I made some bad bets, sure, but why should I suffer when I've got someone willing to clean up my messes for me? Naomi's knees weakened. She slid down the wall until she was crouched on the floor, one hand pressed over her mouth to keep the sob from escaping. For 3 years, she had carried the weight of both their lives. Every bill, every late payment, every sleepless night. She told herself love meant sacrifice, that this storm would pass, that Derek would see how hard she worked and change. But now, in the space of a few cruel sentences, that illusion shattered. Hey, another voice said through the speakerphone, teasing. What about that girl, Amber? You still seeing her? Naomi's blood turned to ice. Oh yeah, Derek said casually, as if it were nothing. Amber doesn't know about the debt. I take her out, buy her nice things, keep her happy. She thinks I'm doing well. You're using Naomi's money to date another woman? Someone asked, half shocked, half amused. Where else would I get it? Derek replied, and his laughter filled the room again. Naomi doesn't even check the accounts anymore. She's too tired to notice. She just works, deposits her checks, and keeps going. I skim a little off the top every time. Easy. Naomi's heart clenched so tight she thought it might burst. Her chest ached, her breath coming in sharp, shallow gasps. Every shift she'd pulled, every aching muscle, every tear she'd swallowed in silence. He had taken it all and laughed about it. Her eyes burned as she looked down the hallway, past the dim light spilling from under the bedroom door. Beyond that door was the man she'd once trusted more than anyone, the man she'd sacrificed herself for. Now she saw him clearly for the first time, not as the charming dreamer who had promised her a better future, but as a parasite, a man feeding off her exhaustion, her faith, her love. The voices on the phone faded into a blur, but she caught pieces. She really doesn't know? Nope. She thinks we're in this together. Damn, man, you're living the dream. Naomi pressed a fist to her mouth, shaking violently. Tears slid down her face in silence. She wanted to scream, to burst into the room and throw everything she'd ever bought at him. His expensive whiskey, his designer shoes, the big TV she'd paid off in installments while eating ramen noodles in her car between shifts. But she didn't move. Something inside her, something raw and fragile, was breaking, yes, but underneath that breaking was something else. Something harder, sharper. When Derek's laughter finally softened and the call ended, Naomi stayed where she was. Minutes passed, maybe hours. She couldn't tell. The clock ticked faintly in the kitchen, marking every second of her unraveling. Her thoughts raced and froze all at once. She replayed every memory, every argument, every apology he had ever given her. "You're my partner," he'd said. "I just need time. You're the only one who believes in me." What a fool she had been. Naomi pushed herself up from the floor, her legs unsteady. She walked to the kitchen on autopilot, her eyes landing on the small mountain of dirty dishes in the sink, Derek's dishes. Always Derek's. She stared at them, remembering how she used to wash them every night before sleeping. How she had once found comfort in the routine, convincing herself that love was in the small things. The meals she cooked, the home she kept, the effort she poured into keeping their lives afloat. Now, those dishes looked like evidence of her captivity. Her reflection in the window was pale, almost ghost-like. The woman looking back at her didn't seem real. How many years had she spent like this? Working, hoping, loving. And for what? To be laughed at by strangers while her husband bragged about using her like a servant. Her mind flickered to Amber, the mystery woman she'd only heard about in passing, the one who had her husband's charm, her husband's attention, her husband's money. The money Naomi had earned. She wanted to hate Amber, to imagine her as a homewrecker, a thief. But deep down, she knew the real thief was Derek. Amber was just another piece in his web of lies. Naomi's breath steadied. Slowly, deliberately, she wiped her tears with the back of her hand. Her exhaustion hadn't disappeared. It was still there, heavy as ever. But now, beneath the weariness, there was clarity. She looked around the kitchen, the spotless counter she'd scrubbed, the house she'd paid for, the life she had built, and realized none of it had ever been hers. Not really. She'd been working to preserve a lie, and that lie had just died. Naomi walked toward the bedroom door and stopped just outside it. Derek's voice was softer now, humming along to the TV, completely unaware. She could have gone in, thrown open the door, and confronted him. But what would that do? He would lie. He always lied, and she was too tired for another performance. So instead, she backed away, quietly, carefully, and returned to the guest room, the one she'd started sleeping in when her back problems had become an excuse for distance. She sat on the edge of the bed and stared at the wall, the sound of the television muffled through the house. Her hands trembled, but her mind was no longer clouded by confusion. She knew what had to come next. The woman who had walked through that door an hour ago had been a wife, a believer, a servant of love. The woman sitting here now was something else entirely. Naomi wasn't Derek's slave. Not anymore. The laughter from the bedroom still echoed faintly down the hallway when Naomi's tears finally stopped. They hadn't run out because the pain was gone. No, the pain had only just begun, but because something inside her had gone still. Quiet. Cold. For 3 years, she'd moved through her life in a fog of exhaustion, measuring her days in shifts and paychecks, telling herself that endurance was love. But now the fog was burning away, replaced by something she hadn't felt in years: clarity. She stood there in the hallway, her hand pressed against the wall for balance. Derek's voice still murmured through the closed door, softer now, the kind of lazy tone he used when the world was safely revolving around him. Naomi inhaled slowly. Then she turned, not toward the bedroom, but toward the door across the hall, the one he called his office. She hadn't stepped inside in months. Derek had told her he needed space, privacy for business matters. It was always locked except tonight. Tonight, the door stood ajar, as if fate itself had finally cracked it open. Naomi pushed the door wider, and a faint scent of whiskey and sweat hit her. The room was chaos. Clothes on the chair, papers scattered on the desk, half-empty bottles lined up like soldiers of bad decisions. She stepped inside and flicked on the light. The clutter looked harmless at first, just the usual debris of a man who claimed to be working. But as she looked closer, she began to see the truth beneath the mess. Receipts. Stacks of them. Jewelry stores. Restaurants she'd never eaten at. Hotels in parts of town she'd never visited. Naomi's heart began to race, but not from panic this time. From purpose. She walked to the desk and opened the first drawer. Credit card statements. Dozens of them, thick envelopes with balances that made her stomach twist. 15,000 here. 20 there. Another for 8. She recognized none of the charges. Not a single one. There was a line of handwriting on one envelope in Derek's scrawl, "Handle this later." Her lips curled into something between a sneer and a bitter smile. Oh, he'd handled it. All right, by handing it to her. She sat in his chair, the leather creaking beneath her weight. The laptop on the desk was still open, the glow of the screen casting a faint light across the papers. The desktop wallpaper was a photo of the two of them on their wedding day. She stared at it for a long time. They looked happy. They had been happy, or maybe she had been. Derek had always looked more like a man proud of a possession than a partner. She'd been too in love to see it. Her thumb traced the edge of the screen. That woman in white had no idea what was coming. No idea she would become a machine, programmed to work, to sacrifice, to survive. Naomi closed the laptop and exhaled. Then, quietly, methodically, she pulled her phone from her pocket and started taking photos. Each credit card bill, each receipt, each document that screamed of lies. The flash of the camera was the only sound in the room. Small bursts of light illuminating years of deceit. She wasn't shaking anymore. Her exhaustion was still there, but it felt different now. Focused, refined. She could feel her mind sharpening with every click. Click. Hotel receipt, $400 for one night. Click. Restaurant bill, champagne and oysters for 2. Click. Jewelry store, diamond bracelet. She found a small velvet box at the bottom of a drawer. Inside was a receipt, dated last month, for a necklace worth more than her month's rent. No necklace inside, just the receipt. She didn't need to ask who had received it. Naomi placed the box back exactly where she'd found it. Then she stood up and looked around one last time. Everything in this room, the papers, the lies, the smell of betrayal, belonged to the life she was about to leave behind. For the first time in years, she knew exactly what she needed to do. She turned off the light and closed the door quietly behind her. In the guest bathroom, she locked the door, sat on the edge of the tub, and opened her phone. Her fingers hovered over the screen for a moment before she began scrolling through her photos. Dozens of images stared back at her, proof of everything she'd refused to see. It was strange how calm she felt, like her body had finally caught up to the truth her heart had been whispering for years. She opened her banking app next. The joint account balance was $800. Her paycheck had just gone in yesterday. Derek had already transferred $600 to his business account. Her jaw tightened. She scrolled back through the transaction history. Transfer after transfer after transfer. Thousands of dollars gone, siphoned slowly, month after month. Her thumb stopped. One note beside a transfer caught her eye. Client expense reimbursement. She almost laughed. Client expense. She'd been the client, the sponsor, the fool. Naomi's reflection in the dark phone screen looked unfamiliar. Eyes rimmed with fatigue, but alive. Awake. She opened her email next. The blinking cursor in the search bar felt like a heartbeat. She typed, "Divorce lawyer near me." The list loaded. Her vision blurred with tears, but she blinked them away. She clicked the first name that looked credible, Patricia Walker, family law specialist. Naomi opened a blank message and began typing. Subject, consultation request. Urgent hello Patricia. My name is Naomi Fletcher. I need legal advice regarding divorce and financial issues. My husband has been lying about debts, using my income without consent, and her fingers faltered. She stared at the screen, then continued. I've attached no documents yet, but I have evidence. I just need to know where to begin. She read the message twice, her thumb hovering over the send button. For a second, the old Naomi surfaced, the one who believed in forgiveness, in patience, and second chances. The one who would have said, maybe he didn't mean it. Maybe he can change. But then she heard his voice again in her head, that cruel echo. She's my personal slave. No more. Naomi pressed send. The whoosh of the outgoing email sounded small, almost insignificant, but it felt like the loudest noise she'd ever made. Her heart pounded. She sat still, staring at the phone screen, waiting for the fear to return. But it didn't. Instead, a strange stillness filled her. Relief. For years, she believed the key to her marriage was working harder, being better, forgiving faster. But now she saw it clearly. She'd been trying to build a life with a man who had never intended to build one with her. Naomi stood and walked back into the hallway. The house was silent again. Derek's door was closed, the light still glowing faintly beneath it. She could hear the faint rhythm of his snoring. She looked around. The kitchen she'd cleaned 1,000 times, the living room she'd furnished, the life she had built piece by piece. Everything felt smaller now, as if the illusion that once filled it had been drained away. She picked up her purse from where it had fallen earlier, set it on the table, and glanced once more down the hallway. Enjoy it while it lasts, she whispered under her breath. Then she turned off the light and went to bed. Not to collapse, not to escape, but to rest. For the first time in years, rest wasn't a luxury. It was preparation. Tomorrow, she wouldn't just wake up for work. Tomorrow, she'd wake up for herself. The next morning, Naomi woke with a clarity that almost frightened her. For years, she'd opened her eyes to a list of obligations. Shifts to work, bills to pay, a husband to save. But today, for the first time, her thoughts didn't race toward him. They turned inward toward herself. The house was quiet. Derek had already left, or maybe he was pretending to have somewhere important to go again. Either way, his absence was a gift. Naomi sat at the kitchen table, phone in hand, staring at the email she'd sent the night before. The one to Patricia Walker. There it was. Sent. And beneath it, a new message. Hi, Naomi. I'm available for a consultation this afternoon. Let's talk. Her heart skipped. Part of her wanted to delete it, to pretend none of this was happening. Another part, the stronger, steadier part, whispered go. Patricia Walker's office was nothing like Naomi had imagined. It wasn't cold or intimidating. The walls were painted a soft ivory, lined with photographs of women shaking hands, smiling, standing tall. The kind of women who looked like they'd once been broken and had rebuilt themselves. Patricia herself was in her 40s, with kind eyes and a quiet confidence that filled the room. She didn't talk fast or frown while Naomi stumbled through her story. She just listened. Naomi told her everything. The debts, the jobs, the lies, the night she overheard him laughing. Every detail poured out like a confession years overdue. When she finished, there was silence. Patricia tapped her pen thoughtfully against her notebook. Naomi, she said gently, I'm going to tell you something important, and I want you to really hear it. Naomi nodded, bracing herself. None of this is your fault. And his debts? They're not legally yours unless you co-signed. Naomi blinked, stunned. Wait, what? Patricia smiled faintly. You said he took out those loans under his name, correct? Yes. He always said I didn't need to worry about the details. Then those debts are his, Naomi, not yours. Patricia leaned forward slightly. He's been using you, not just emotionally, but financially. That's called financial abuse. It's a form of control, but you don't have to let him keep that control anymore. Naomi's throat tightened. Financial abuse. The words felt foreign, heavy, yet painfully true. She'd never given a name. Patricia slid a legal pad across the desk. Here's what we're going to do, she said calmly. Step 1. Separate your finances. Do you have a bank account in your name only? Naomi shook her head. Open one. Today. Deposit your next paycheck there. Redirect all future payments, work, side jobs, everything. Do not tell him. Naomi took notes, her hand trembling, but she kept writing. Step 2. Patricia continued. Start saving quietly. Even a little bit. We'll gather your financial records, your proof, and we'll prepare the paperwork. When you're ready, I'll file for divorce. Divorce. The word used to terrify Naomi. Now it sounded like oxygen. Patricia smiled gently. I can see you're scared. That's normal. But you're not powerless, Naomi. You've just been made to feel that way. Naomi swallowed hard. He always said I couldn't manage without him, that I'd fall apart. Patricia's eyes softened. People who depend on control always say that. But here's the truth. You've been managing everything. The only thing you'll lose by leaving him is exhaustion. Naomi let out a shaky laugh. It was the first time she'd laughed in months. Not because anything was funny, but because for the first time, she could see a crack of light in the darkness. When she left the office an hour later, the world looked different. The sky was the same dull gray, but it no longer felt heavy. She walked slower, straighter. For the first time, she wasn't rushing toward survival. She was walking toward freedom. That evening, Naomi did exactly what Patricia had told her to do. She went to the bank after work and opened an account in her own name. The banker asked routine questions, identification, address, employment, and she answered each one with a strange sense of triumph. When she slid her first $100 into the account, her hands shook. It wasn't much, but it was hers. The next step was harder. She sat in her car in the bank parking lot, phone in hand, and stared at Derek's name in her contacts. She almost texted him, out of habit, to tell him where she was, what she'd done. But then she remembered Patricia's words, do not tell him. So she didn't. She locked her phone, started the car, and drove away. Over the next few weeks, Naomi began to rebuild piece by piece. She met with Patricia twice more, organizing her paperwork and documenting every transaction Derek had made. Each receipt, each email, each transfer was another brick in the wall she was building, a barrier between her and the man who had drained her. And in between those meetings, she took another brave step. She found a therapist, Dr. Helen. Dr. Helen's office smelled faintly of lavender, her voice soft but steady. The first session was quiet. Naomi barely spoke. But when she did, the words spilled out like water breaking through a dam. I feel stupid, Naomi whispered one afternoon, twisting a tissue in her hands. I thought love was supposed to be about sacrifice. Dr. Helen nodded slowly. It is, Naomi, but real love doesn't demand that one person loses themselves for the other. What you've experienced isn't love. It's control disguised as dependence. Naomi blinked back tears. I didn't even know this kind of abuse existed. That's how it works, Dr. Helen said softly. It thrives in silence and fatigue. But you're speaking now. That's how you take your power back. Power. The word pulsed in Naomi's chest like a heartbeat. Weeks turned into a quiet rhythm of rebuilding. Naomi started saving more money, canceling shared accounts, updating her passwords. Every task was small, ordinary, but each one was a step away from the cage she hadn't realized she was living in. Some nights, Derek would still come home late, his lies sloppy and half-formed. She no longer listened. She no longer cried. She simply observed, calm, detached, patient. She was planning quietly, carefully, and in those moments, something beautiful happened. Her exhaustion stopped defining her. She began sleeping through the night. She started cooking for herself again, small, simple meals. She bought a journal and began writing, rediscovering the woman she used to be before everything became survival. Each day, she felt herself returning. Each day, she reclaimed another inch of her own life. One evening, sitting by her window, Naomi looked at the city lights glowing in the distance. Her phone buzzed with a message from Patricia. Everything's in place. When you're ready, we can file. Naomi smiled, her heart steady. She wasn't ready yet, but she would be. Soon. For the first time in years, her future no longer felt like a burden. It felt like a choice. She whispered into the quiet room, step by step. And for the first time, those words didn't sound like survival. They sounded like freedom. If you were Naomi, tired, used, and underestimated, would you keep waiting for change, or would you start building your own escape plan today? It happened on a Tuesday night, the kind of night that smelled like rain and secrets. Naomi was folding laundry in the living room when she heard it. A faint vibration, muffled and unfamiliar. Not her phone. Derek's phone usually blared obnoxious ringtones, but this sound was different, quieter, shorter, urgent. She froze, scanning the room. Derek was in the shower, steam whispering from behind the closed bathroom door. The sound came again from the couch cushions. Naomi's pulse quickened. She lifted a pillow, then another, until she saw it. A sleek black phone she didn't recognize. No case. No scratches. A newer model than the one Derek always carried. For a moment, she just stared. The air seemed to thin around her. Her mind whispered the truth she didn't want to believe. A secret phone. She picked it up. No password. The screen lit instantly. Messages everywhere. Dozens. At the top of the list was a name she already knew too well. Amber. Her throat tightened as she scrolled. Amber, you said she's moving out soon. When? Derek, soon, baby. She's just too tired to argue anymore. I've got her right where I want her. Amber, you're awful, but I love it. Derek, she thinks she's doing all this for us. She's paying my debts, funding our future, and she doesn't even know. Naomi's breath hitched. The words blurred before her eyes. Every syllable carved deeper into the place where her heart used to be soft. She kept scrolling. Derek, I told her we're separating. She bought it. Poor thing still brings me lunch sometimes. Amber, you're bad, but I like bad. Derek, you'd like it even more if you saw her face when she hands me her paycheck. Naomi's hand shook, not from rage, but from something colder. She wasn't crying. She wasn't even breathing properly. Her body was trembling, but her mind was razor sharp. This was it. The truth lay bare. No more illusions. No more excuses. She scrolled further, past the jokes, past the laughter, until she found the photos, dinners, hotel rooms, gifts she didn't recognize. A necklace. The same one she'd seen the receipt for in his desk weeks ago. Around Amber's neck. Naomi's chest felt hollow, but her fingers moved with steady purpose. She opened her own phone and began to take photos. Every message, every image, every transaction. Proof. Click, click, click. Each photo was another piece of armor. By the time Derek stepped out of the shower, humming to himself, Naomi had returned the phone to its hiding spot beneath the cushion and resumed folding the laundry. Her face was calm, her voice even. Long shower, she said softly when he passed by. Yeah, he replied, careless. Needed to clear my head. She smiled faintly. Of course you did. He didn't notice the weight behind her words. He never did. That night, Naomi lay awake in bed, eyes fixed on the ceiling. The truth replayed in her mind like a film. The laughter, the words, the betrayal. But for the first time, the pain didn't drown her. It sharpened her. By morning, she had a plan. She spent the next few days gathering everything she could, screenshots, receipts, financial records. Each piece fit neatly into the file she'd started on her laptop, titled simply, Freedom. Derek remained oblivious, floating in his world of deceit, blind to the storm building quietly beside him. But the storm wasn't rage. It was focus. 3 nights later, while Naomi was reviewing her notes for Patricia, her phone buzzed. The message came from an unknown number. Unknown. Hi. Is this Naomi? I'm sorry for texting you, but I think we need to talk. It's about Derek. Her heart stilled. She replied, cautious. Who is this? Unknown. It's Amber. I didn't know he was married. He told me you two were separated, that you left him months ago. But I just found your name on a bill. He used your money for our trip. Naomi stared at the screen for a long moment. Part of her wanted to rage at the woman, to scream, you knew. But deep down, she knew Amber had been fed the same lies she once believed. Amber sent another message. I'm so sorry. I didn't mean to hurt anyone. I just wanted to tell you the truth. He said awful things about you. I thought you deserved to know. Naomi's fingers hovered over the keyboard. Then she typed slowly, deliberately. Naomi, we're not separated. You're welcome to him. And then she put the phone down. No more explanations. No anger. Just truth. Amber's typing bubble appeared, then disappeared. No reply came. Naomi exhaled, a slow, measured release, like she was letting go of something heavy she'd carried too long. When Derek came home later that night, she was sitting at the kitchen table, a cup of tea in her hands. Her posture calm, composed. He smiled at her, oblivious. Hey, babe, you look nice. You okay? She looked at him, really looked. The man who once made her heart skip, now just looked small. His charm was thinner now, stretched over the cracks of coward. I'm fine, she said simply. Just tired. Yeah, me too. He chuckled, rubbing his neck. Work's been killing me lately. Naomi almost laughed. Work. He didn't even have a job. But she said nothing. Instead, she studied him the way one studies a fading reflection, a ghost of something that used to matter. He walked away, muttering about dinner. Naomi's gaze followed him, her mind detached, her resolve unshakable. The mask he wore was still there, the confident husband, the man with excuses and charm. But now she could see every crack, every shadow behind his smile. He didn't know it yet, but the walls were closing in. Every lie he'd told, every game he'd played was about to collapse. Later that night, Naomi returned to her secret folder, adding screenshots from Amber's messages to her growing collection of evidence. When she saved the last image, she whispered, "It's almost over." The words didn't sound angry. They sounded final. She closed her laptop, feeling the quiet hum of empowerment in her chest. It was no longer about revenge. It was about freedom, about taking back the power he'd stolen piece by piece. Naomi glanced at the secret phone, still hidden beneath the cushion. She didn't need to look through it again. She'd seen enough. Derek's illusion was crumbling, and he didn't even know the floor beneath him was gone. For the first time in years, Naomi didn't feel like a ghost in her own home. She felt like a witness, a silent architect of her own escape. That night, as she lay in bed beside him, she stared into the darkness and realized something profound. He had spent years mocking her exhaustion, but that exhaustion had forged something unbreakable. Her pain had become her armor. Derek mumbled in his sleep, oblivious. Naomi turned away, eyes open, her mind steady. Tomorrow would come, and when it did, she would no longer be his victim. She would be his undoing. If you were Naomi, standing in the quiet ruins of someone else's lies, would you confront the deceiver, or would you build your freedom so powerfully that they're forced to face themselves without you? The morning Naomi decided to confront Derek, the sky was washed in a pale gold light that felt too beautiful for what she was about to do. She stood by the window, holding a cup of coffee that had long gone cold, watching the world wake up, joggers passing by, cars humming in the distance, a soft wind stirring the curtains. For the first time in years, she wasn't rushing anywhere. She wasn't thinking about bills, schedules, or excuses. Just silence, steady and clean. The kind of silence that comes when a decision has already been made. On the kitchen table lay a neatly organized folder. Inside were the documents Patricia had prepared, the divorce papers. Naomi had read every line, her eyes tracing each word until they blurred. Freedom, she realized, didn't come as a feeling at first. It came as paperwork. Behind her, Derek's footsteps echoed down the hallway. He was still half asleep, hair messy, wearing the same smirk that had once made her heart flutter. Now it just looked like arrogance, a man too sure the world would always bend for him. "Morning," he muttered, reaching for the coffee pot. You didn't make breakfast? Naomi turned to him, calm and composed. No, not today. He raised an eyebrow. Rough night. You could say that, she said softly, sliding the folder across the table. Derek frowned, glancing down. What's this? Divorce papers, she said, her voice steady, quiet, not angry, not trembling, just final. For a moment, he didn't react. Then he laughed, a short, sharp sound of disbelief. You're kidding. Naomi didn't move. No, I'm done. He scoffed, pushing the papers back toward her. Done? Naomi, don't be ridiculous. You're tired, that's all. You've been overworking yourself again. Her gaze didn't waver. I'm tired, yes, but not confused. I know exactly what I'm doing. Derek's tone shifted, the familiar edge creeping in. You can't just walk away from this. We've got debts, responsibilities. She cut him off. Your debts, your responsibilities, not mine anymore. He blinked, thrown off by the calm precision of her voice. You really think you can handle life on your own? He said, sneering. You'd fall apart without me. Naomi's lips curved into something that wasn't quite a smile. That's what you always said. And yet, somehow, I've been the one holding everything together. He stepped closer, lowering his voice. Naomi, come on. Don't do this. You're overreacting. I made mistakes, sure, but you're my wife. She looked at him, really looked. The man standing before her wasn't a mystery anymore. She could see the lies etched into every twitch of his mouth, every desperate flicker in his eyes. No, she said quietly. I was your lifeline, your safety net, your excuse to never change. He laughed again, harsher this time. You're acting like you're some kind of saint. Don't forget who helped you win. Stop. Her voice cut through his like glass. The room went still. Naomi took a slow breath and said, You called me your slave. The color drained from his face. He opened his mouth, stammering, You were never supposed to. I heard you, she interrupted. You laughed about it. You bragged about it. Every hour I worked, every ache I carried, every dream I buried. It was all just a joke to you. He stepped back, his bravado faltering. Naomi, I didn't mean it like that. She straightened, eyes fierce but calm. You did. And now, I'm done meaning anything for you. She picked up the folder and held it out to him. Sign them, or don't. Either way, this ends today. He stared at her, speechless. For once, the man who always had something to say had nothing. When he finally spoke, his voice was smaller. You're really leaving? Yes. And where will you go? She smiled faintly, almost kindly. Somewhere you can't follow, forward. Derek's jaw tightened. You'll regret this. Naomi met his gaze one last time. No, she said softly. You will, because you called me your slave, but you're the one who's about to lose everything. And with that, she turned away. The suitcase by the door was already packed. Not much inside, just her essentials. A few clothes, documents, the small photo of her late father that had always given her strength. As she rolled it out the door, Derek's voice rose behind her, calling her name, shouting apologies that sounded too much like manipulation. But she didn't turn back. Not once. The air outside was crisp and alive. The morning sun broke fully through the clouds, painting the street in light. Naomi paused on the sidewalk, took a deep breath, and for the first time in years, the weight on her chest lifted. Her steps felt unsteady at first. Freedom was strange, unfamiliar, but every movement forward grew surer, stronger. Her mother's house sat on the edge of town, surrounded by hibiscus and old trees that whispered in the wind. When Naomi arrived, her mother opened the door before she could even knock. My child, her mother gasped, pulling her into a hug. What's wrong? Naomi wanted to speak, but the words tangled in her throat. She hadn't cried since that night. She overheard Derek on the phone, but now, in her mother's arms, the dam broke. Tears came in waves, not from heartbreak, but from release. Years of silence and endurance spilling out all at once. Her mother held her tighter, whispering, You're safe now, Naomi. You're safe. Naomi nodded against her shoulder, sobbing harder. Safe. The word tasted new. They sat on the old couch, sunlight pooling through the curtains. Naomi laughed through her tears, shaking her head. I thought I'd feel broken, she said. But I don't. I just feel light. Her mother smiled softly. That's what freedom feels like. Naomi leaned back, closing her eyes. The ache in her body was still there, but it no longer felt like defeat. It was proof of survival. For the first time in years, she wasn't living in reaction to someone else's chaos. She was living for herself. That evening, she stood outside on the porch, watching the horizon fade into gold. The world felt wide again, full of quiet possibilities. She whispered to the wind, "I'm free." The words didn't feel like defiance. They felt like prayer. Tomorrow, she would start over. It wouldn't be easy, but it would be hers. And for Naomi, that was enough. If you discovered the courage to walk away from everything that broke you, would you hesitate, or would you take that first breath of freedom and never look back? The rain had just stopped when Naomi unlocked the door to her new apartment. The smell of fresh paint and quiet lingered in the air. That new space scent that whispered of beginnings, not endings. It wasn't much. A small one-bedroom on the third floor, overlooking a narrow street lined with jacaranda trees. The floor creaked, the kitchen faucet dripped, and the walls were bare except for one framed quote she'd hung above the couch. She remembered who she was, and the game changed. Naomi stood in the doorway, a box in her hands, and smiled. It had been 8 months since she'd walked away from Derek, 8 months since she'd signed the final papers with Patricia by her side. In that time, she'd rebuilt her life piece by piece, quietly, steadily, and with a grace born from survival. The first few weeks had been chaos. She cried often, slept little, and wondered if she'd done the right thing. Freedom, she'd learned, wasn't just release, it was responsibility. There were moments when she'd catch herself reaching for her phone to text him, not out of longing, but out of habit. But she didn't. Every time the urge came, she reminded herself, "You owe him nothing." Instead, Naomi turned that energy inward. She picked up the pieces of herself she had long ignored. Her dreams, her goals, her identity. She'd always loved helping people, always wanted to work in healthcare, but life with Derek had turned every dream into debt and exhaustion. Now, she was ready to try again. So she enrolled in a certification program for physical therapy. It was terrifying at first, sitting in a classroom full of younger students, her hands trembling as she took notes. But with each passing week, the fear began to fade, replaced by confidence. Naomi discovered she was good at it. Her patients at the training center loved her. Her calm presence, her empathy, her ability to listen without judgment. One elderly woman told her, "You've got healing hands, dear. You don't just fix the body, you soothe the soul." Naomi had smiled then, but later that night, those words echoed in her heart. She was healing herself too. Her days filled with quiet purpose. She worked part-time at a rehabilitation clinic, attended evening classes, and spent weekends walking in the park with her mother. There were no raised voices, no slammed doors, no guilt trips or manipulation. Just peace, the kind of peace she'd once thought didn't exist for her. She learned the small joys again, brewing coffee in the morning, reading by the window, falling asleep without dread. Each moment was a reminder that she had rebuilt her world from nothing, and it was enough. Sometimes on rainy nights, she'd remember the woman she used to be, exhausted, afraid, and bound by obligation. Naomi didn't hate her. She honored her, because that woman had survived long enough for this one to be born. A year later, Naomi stood in front of a mirror, dressed in a simple white blouse and soft gray slacks. In her hand was a certificate, her physical therapy license. She'd done it. The reflection staring back at her looked the same. Same deep brown eyes, same tired but resilient smile. But something inside had changed. The light was back. That evening, she celebrated with her mother and a few classmates. There was laughter, good food, and for the first time in years, no shadows at her table. Freedom didn't just feel peaceful anymore. It felt joyful. It was around that time that she met Isaiah. It wasn't some grand, cinematic moment. No lightning bolt. No instant infatuation. They met at a community health fair where Naomi volunteered. He was setting up a booth for a local nonprofit that supported young adults recovering from trauma. He had kind eyes, a patient voice, and the sort of presence that didn't demand attention but quietly earned it. They talked over coffee afterward, and the conversation flowed easily. He didn't ask for her past. He asked about her future, about her goals, about what made her happy. Naomi found herself smiling in a way she hadn't in years. Not the practiced smile of politeness, but a genuine one that reached her soul. Over time, they began to see each other more often. Lunches, walks, long conversations about life and healing. Isaiah never pushed, never pried. He simply showed up, consistent, honest, gentle. When he looked at her, Naomi didn't feel small or indebted. She felt seen. Years passed. Naomi built a steady career as a physical therapist. She helped people walk again, move again, believe again. Her hands, once worn from overwork and strain, now carried purpose. She loved her job, her home, and herself, all in equal measure. And though Isaiah was by her side, she understood something powerful. Her happiness didn't depend on anyone else anymore. Love was no longer a lifeline. It was a choice. One afternoon, Naomi stopped by a small cafe downtown after finishing with a patient. The bell above the door jingled as she stepped inside. The smell of coffee and cinnamon wrapped around her like an old friend. She ordered her drink and turned toward a window seat and froze. Across the room, sitting alone at a corner table, was Derek. He looked smaller. His once confident posture slouched, his clothes wrinkled. The charm that used to fill a room had dimmed into something hollow. He was staring at his phone, his expression distant, defeated. For a long moment, Naomi just watched him. There was a time when seeing him would have shattered her. A time when her chest would have filled with anger or longing or pain. But now, she felt none of that. Only pity. Derek looked up and saw her. His eyes widened slightly, then softened into something like recognition, or maybe regret. He started to stand, but Naomi simply gave a small nod, a polite acknowledgement of someone who once knew her name. Then she turned away. She didn't owe him a conversation. She didn't owe him closure. Her closure was the life she had built, the laughter that now filled her home, the strength in her own voice, the peace she carried everywhere she went. As she left the cafe, the sunlight caught her hair, and she smiled. Not because she had won, but because she had healed. Derek's world might have stayed in ashes, but Naomi had learned to rise from hers. That night, sitting by her window, Naomi thought of the woman she had once been, tired, trapped, and unaware of her own power. And she whispered softly, "Thank you. You kept going." She wasn't just free. She was reborn, a survivor, a healer, a woman who had turned pain into power and scars into strength. Naomi had become what she was always meant to be, whole. If you lost everything that once defined you, your relationship, your stability, your illusion of love, would you have the courage to start over and rebuild yourself from the ashes? Or would you wait for someone else to rescue you from the fire you were born to escape? Thank you for watching this story to the end. If you enjoyed this story, you will surely love the next one. It's as crazier and more intriguing as you can ever imagine. So do check it out. Click on the image showing on your screen right now to watch the next one.